This episode of the AI Daily Deep Dive podcast was researched entirely by the new AI model O3 Deep Research and is fully AI generated. All right, so are you ready for this? We're diving into some pretty fascinating research. It's about a question that's been keeping a lot of folks up at night, is AI making us dumber?
Oh, it's a question that I think is probably more relevant than ever, especially with the rapid advancements we're seeing in AI technology.
Yeah, for sure. In this research paper we're diving into, well, it definitely doesn't shy away from some of those big concerns. In fact, it kicks things off with this really thought-provoking analogy to the Industrial Revolution and its impact on physical fitness. Do you remember all those stories about how people got less physically active once machines started taking over manual labor?
Yeah, for sure. And that led to an increase in what researchers call hypokinetic diseases. All those things, like heart disease and obesity, that are linked to a lack of physical activity. Well, this paper is essentially asking if the same thing could happen to our brains in the age of AI.
So, could we be headed for like cognitive atrophy, some kind of mental couch potato syndrome? If we just offload too much of our thinking to AI.
That's the big question at the heart of this whole research project. It uses this new term, AI chatbot-induced cognitive atrophy. They call it ASICA.
ASICA. Huh. It almost sounds like a medical diagnosis, doesn't it?
It does, kind of has a ring to it. But beyond just the terminology, the paper really dives into some serious research, looking at the specific cognitive abilities that might be most vulnerable in an AI-driven world.
Okay, so let's break that down a little. What are the core mental skills that are kind of at stake here?
Well, the paper identifies several key areas. You've got memory, attention, problem solving, language, creativity, and even social emotional intelligence. These are like the building blocks of human cognition, the things that allow us to think, learn, and interact with the world.
Okay, that makes sense. But where does AI fit into all of this? I mean, it's pretty obvious that AI is already really good at certain things, like playing chess or generating text. But are those skills truly comparable to human intelligence?
That's a really key point that this research is grappling with. It acknowledges that AI excels in tasks involving data storage, pattern recognition, and repetitive actions. Think of things like search engines, facial recognition software, or even those AI systems that can churn out an entire essay in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, but I feel like there's still this big difference between like an AI writing an essay and a human writing one?
Exactly. And the paper does a good job of highlighting that distinction. It points out that while AI can kind of mimic certain aspects of human cognition, it still falls short when it comes to things like flexible thinking, common sense reasoning, moral judgment, and the kind of creativity that comes from, real lived experience.
So AI can write an essay, but it can't really understand the emotions behind a poem.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. AI can process and manipulate information, but it doesn't have that same depth of understanding that comes from the human experience.
Okay, well, that's reassuring in a way. But it also makes me wonder, what happens to our own cognitive skills if we start relying too heavily on AI for those tasks that it is good at? Like, is there a risk that those skills will just atrophy from lack of use?
Well, that's the core of this whole AI-induced cognitive atrophy concern, and it's something this paper really explores in depth. It looks at it especially through the lens of something called cognitive offloading.
Cognitive offloading, is that just a fancy way of saying we're kind of letting AI do our thinking for us?
Yeah, in essence, yes. It's the idea that as AI becomes more capable, we might be tempted to outsource more and more of our mental tasks to it, much like we outsourced physical labor during the Industrial Revolution. And just as our bodies can become weaker if we don't use them, well, our brains might also suffer if we don't give them a good workout.
Okay, so I think we've established that AI is really good at some very specific tasks, but it's not necessarily a replacement for the full range of human cognitive abilities. And we've introduced this idea of cognitive offloading and the potential for it to lead to, well, maybe mental laziness.
Exactly. And to really understand the implications of this, the paper kind of takes us on this historical journey, looking at how human cognition has evolved and adapted to new tools and technologies throughout history.
Ooh, I'm always up for a good history lesson. So rewind the tape. How has human thinking changed over time?
Well, one of the key takeaways from this historical perspective is that our brains are not static. They're incredibly adaptable and constantly evolving in response to our environment and the tools we use.
That's interesting, but hasn't there also been research suggesting that our cognitive abilities might actually be declining in recent years?
hmm
I vaguely remember reading something about this reverse Flynn effect.
You're right. The Flynn effect, named after the researcher who first observed it, refers to the steady rise in IQ scores that was observed throughout the 20th century.
So you're saying people were getting smarter. What was driving that?
Well, researchers believe it was likely due to a combination of factors, including improvements in education, nutrition, and overall living standards. But in recent decades, this trend seems to have kind of stalled or even reversed in some places.
And that's what's known as the reverse Flynn effect. What's the explanation for that?
It's still being debated, but some researchers suggest that it could be related to changes in our environment, including the increasing prevalence of technology and digital media.
So while technology might have initially contributed to increased cognitive abilities, it's now possible that it's having the opposite effect.
Yeah, that's one of the hypotheses this research is exploring. And it raises some important questions about how AI, as a particularly powerful and pervasive technology, might be shaping our cognitive landscape.
So the big question then is, are our brains evolving to be more efficient with AI, or are we setting ourselves up for some sort of cognitive decline?
Yeah, it's a question that requires us to carefully examine both the potential benefits and the potential risks of AI integration into our lives.
For sure. And I think this is where the research paper gets really interesting, where it starts to unpack some of the early research findings on AI's impact on our brains. And I have to admit, some of it is a little bit alarming.
It is. There are studies that are starting to emerge that suggest heavy AI use could be linked to lower critical thinking scores, especially among younger people.
Wait, are you serious? AI is making young people less able to think critically. That's kind of scary.
It's certainly something to be mindful of. One study, conducted by Michael Gerlish in 2025, found a correlation between heavy reliance on AI tools and a decline in certain critical thinking skills, such as evaluating information and identifying logical fallacies.
So the more we offload our thinking to AI, the less practice we get at those critical thinking skills and the weaker they become. It's like that use it or lose it principle they always talk about with physical fitness.
Exactly. And the Gerlich study also found that this effect was especially strong in younger people whose brains are still developing. It seems that those critical thinking skills need to be actively cultivated, especially during those really formative years.
Okay, so that's one side of the coin, but what about the other side? Didn't we also talk about the potential for AI to actually enhance human cognition?
We did. And that's where the paper shifts gears and starts to explore the, well, you could say, more optimistic side of the AI and cognition equation.
I'm definitely ready for some good news. Tell me more about how AI could actually make us smarter.
Well, one of the most promising areas is the potential for AI to act as a personalized tutor or learning companion. Imagine having an AI system that can adapt to your individual learning style, identify your strengths and weaknesses, and provide tailored feedback and instruction to help you master new skills more effectively.
That sounds incredible, like having a custom-designed education program just like right there at your fingertips.
Exactly. And AI could also be incredibly valuable in helping us make sense of really complex information and uncover patterns that we might miss on our own.
Like those AI systems that are helping scientists discover new drugs or analyze climate data?
Precisely. And the paper highlights this concept of AI acting as cognitive scaffolding, which basically means that it can support us in reaching higher levels of thinking and understanding than we might be able to achieve on our own.
So it's not about AI like replacing our brains, but rather about it helping us to use our brains more effectively.
That's the idea. AI can be a really powerful tool for amplifying human intellect, but it's super important that we use it in a way that keeps us actively engaged and challenged.
This is all really fascinating stuff. So we've got these potential downsides of cognitive atrophy on the one hand, and this potential for cognitive enhancement on the other. It seems like the key takeaway here is that the impact of AI on our brains isn't really predetermined. It really depends on how we choose to interact with it and how we shape its development, right?
You've hit the nail on the head. And that's what makes this whole topic so compelling. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about the choices we make as individuals and as a society.
Okay, so where do we go from here? Are there specific things we could do to make sure we're using AI in a way that enhances our cognitive abilities, not diminishes them?
Absolutely. And that's where this research paper really shines. It doesn't just lay out the potential risks and benefits. It also offers a whole bunch of practical recommendations for individuals, educators, policymakers, and tech developers to help us all navigate this new cognitive landscape.
Well, I'm all ears. Let's dive into those recommendations. I think our listeners are probably eager to learn what they can do to stay mentally sharp in the age of AI.
Great. We'll explore all those in detail in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so let's jump into what we can actually do to, mitigate the risk of this AI-induced cognitive atrophy.
All right, let's get practical.
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks listening are probably thinking, okay, all this talk about cognitive decline is pretty unnerving, but like, what can I actually do? What concrete steps can I take to protect my own brain?
Well, the good news is there's actually a lot we can do, both as individuals and as a society as a whole.
Okay, so give us the rundown. What are the top recommendations from this research?
One of the big themes that emerges is this importance of being mindful and intentional when it comes to how we use AI.
So basically not just blindly accepting whatever the AI spits out, not letting it do all the thinking for us.
Exactly. It's all about being aware of that potential for cognitive offloading and making conscious choices, really staying mentally engaged.
Can you give us some examples? Like what might that look like in everyday life?
Sure. Let's say you're using one of those AI writing assistants to help you draft an email. Instead of just passively accepting all the AI suggestions, actually take the time to read through the text, think about the tone and wording, and make your own edits.
So basically, treat the AI as a starting point, not the finished product.
Exactly. And when you're using AI for research, don't just blindly accept the information it gives you. Cross-check the facts, think about what the source is, and think critically about potential biases.
It's like having a really smart research assistant, but one you still need to double-check sometimes.
Precisely. The paper also emphasizes how important it is to keep engaging in activities that really challenge our cognitive abilities.
You mean like those mental workouts we were talking about?
Exactly. Things like puzzles, strategy games, learning a new language, or even, memorizing poetry. These are activities that require real mental effort, things that can't be easily outsourced to AI.
Okay, so putting down the smartphone and picking up a crossword puzzle, I can get behind that.
Yeah, the idea is to be intentional about doing activities that force us to think deeply, to analyze information, to come up with our own solutions.
It's like reclaiming some of that cognitive territory that we might be tempted to, offload to AI.
You got it. And it's not just about individual effort either. The paper also highlights the importance of education and training.
You mean like teaching people how to use AI effectively?
Yeah, but it goes beyond that. It's about fostering what the paper calls AI literacy, which includes understanding not just the how of AI, but also the why.
Okay, so being able to critically evaluate AI outputs, understanding the limitations of AI, knowing how to formulate good questions for those AI systems, that kind of thing.
Exactly. We need to equip people with the skills to not only use AI tools, but to use them thoughtfully, critically, and responsibly.
It's like with any powerful technology, we need to learn how to wield it wisely.
Precisely. And this education really needs to start early.
So are we talking AI 101 for elementary school kids?
I think that's a great idea. We need to be introducing these concepts to kids from a young age, and making sure that AI literacy is woven into the curriculum throughout their whole education.
And it's not just about formal education either, right? AI is changing so rapidly that we all kind of need to be constantly learning and adapting.
Oh, absolutely. The paper talks about the importance of lifelong learning and providing opportunities for people to, upskill and reskill as the job market keeps evolving.
Which makes total sense. AI is already automating certain tasks,
Yeah.
and that's only going to accelerate, right? So we need to make sure that people have the skills to actually thrive in that AI-driven world.
Exactly. And this brings us to the role of policymakers and tech developers.
Okay, so what can they do to help us, navigate this whole AI revolution in a way that benefits everyone?
Well, for starters, they need to be thinking carefully about the ethical implications of AI development, how AI is being deployed.
So making sure AI is used for good and not for, bad stuff.
Exactly. It's about designing AI systems that are actually aligned with human values and ensuring that those systems are being used in a way that promotes, things like fairness, transparency, and accountability.
Yeah, that sounds crucial. Because if we're not careful, it's pretty easy to imagine AI being used to manipulate people or to, exacerbate existing inequalities.
For sure. And the paper also talks about the importance of transparency and explainability when it comes to AI systems.
What does that mean exactly?
Basically, it means being able to understand how those AI systems actually work and how they're arriving at their conclusions.
So no more black boxes where we just have to kind of trust that the AI is doing the right thing.
Ideally, no. We need to be able to understand the logic behind the decisions AI is making, especially when those decisions have a significant impact on our lives.
That makes sense. But how do we ensure that happens? It seems like a lot of AI development is happening, behind closed doors at these big tech companies.
It's a valid concern. That's why the paper is calling for more collaboration between researchers, policymakers, and these tech companies.
So more open dialogue and information sharing.
Exactly. We need to create a culture of transparency and accountability around AI development.
Okay, I'm definitely seeing a pattern here.
Hmm.
It seems like one of the big takeaways is that we can't just sit back and let AI happen to us. We need to be actively involved in shaping its development and making sure it's used in a way that, benefits humanity.
You've got it. It's about taking ownership of our cognitive future.
I like that. Taking ownership of our cognitive future, it feels empowering, but it also feels like a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
So, where do we even start?
Well, the paper does offer a lot of specific recommendations, but I think a lot of it boils down to these key principles: mindfulness, intentionality, and engagement.
Okay, break those down for me. What do those actually look like, in practice?
Mindfulness is all about being aware of the potential impact of AI on our cognitive abilities and making those conscious choices to stay mentally engaged, like we were talking about. Intentionality is about using AI as a tool to actually augment our thinking, not replace it. And engagement is about actively participating in the conversation about AI and its implications, both individually and collectively.
So it's not about rejecting AI or fearing it. It's about using it wisely, thoughtfully, and ethically.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that AI is ultimately a reflection of us, of humanity.
Whoa, that's a powerful thought. So if we want AI to actually enhance our intelligence, we need to make sure we're putting our own intelligence to good use.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored those potential risks of AI-induced cognitive atrophy, talked about the exciting possibilities for cognitive enhancement, and really looked at the crucial role of education, policy, and individual action in shaping our cognitive future.
This has been such a fascinating and insightful deep dive. And, well, I think it's safe to say AI isn't going anywhere. So as we continue to integrate AI into our lives, it's essential that we keep these insights in mind and make deliberate choices to use it in a way that benefits, not just ourselves, but society as a whole.
I completely agree. And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Hit us with it.
As AI continues to evolve, what role do you want it to play in your own cognitive journey? How will you leverage the power of AI to enhance your own thinking, learning, and creativity?
That's a great question, and I hope all of our listeners take some time to reflect on that. The future of intelligence really is in our hands, and it's up to each of us to shape it wisely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the amazing world of AI and cognition. So we've talked about, the big picture stuff like education, policy, the ethical implications of AI. But let's bring it back down to earth for a second.
Okay, back to the personal level.
Exactly. What can people listening in do today to make sure they're staying, mentally sharp in this world that's changing so fast?
I think it all starts with just recognizing that our brains are kind of like muscles. They need to be exercised regularly to stay strong and healthy.
So it's just like we hit the gym to keep our bodies in shape. We need to find ways to work out our brains.
That's a great analogy. And the good news is that there are just tons of really fun and engaging ways to do that.
Like those mental workouts we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Puzzles, games, learning new stuff.
Exactly. But it actually goes beyond that. This paper also talks about how important it is to cultivate good cognitive hygiene.
Cognitive hygiene. That's a new one. Tell me more.
Well, it's basically about creating those habits and practices that support good brain health.
So getting enough sleep, eating a healthy diet, managing stress, all that good stuff.
Yeah. All of that plays a role, for sure. But it also includes things like being mindful of how much time we're spending staring at screens, limiting distractions, and making sure we're getting enough downtime, allowing our brains to really rest and recharge.
So it's not just about what we do with our brains, but how we treat them, kind of like a car, right?
Right. And this is where the research gets really cool because it starts to explore this fascinating interplay between our physical and mental well-being.
I'm all ears. Tell me more about this mind-body connection.
Well, we know that exercise isn't just good for our bodies, it's also super beneficial for our brains.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that before. Something about exercise releasing endorphins that, make you happy and help your brain work better.
That's part of it, but research is showing that exercise can actually stimulate the growth of new brain cells. Can you believe that? It also helps improve cognitive function in all sorts of areas, including memory, attention, and what they call executive function.
Wow, so hitting the gym is literally a brain booster.
It really is. And it's not just about those really intense workouts. Even moderate exercise, like brisk walking or gardening, can have some big benefits for our cognitive health.
Okay, you've convinced me. Time to dust off those running shoes.
And don't underestimate the importance of sleep either.
Oh, I hear ya. I am the queen of sleep deprivation.
Well, you're not alone.
Yeah.
But sleep is super important for our brains to work the way they should. While we sleep, our brains are busy doing all this stuff, consolidating memories, getting rid of toxins, and getting ready for the day ahead.
So if we're not sleeping enough, it's like our brains are running on empty.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And being chronically sleep deprived can have a really serious impact on our cognitive abilities. Think memory, attention, decision making, even our mood.
Right. I'm making a promise to myself right now. Sleep is a priority from now on. No more late night Netflix binges.
That's great. And speaking of healthy habits, let's not forget about nutrition.
You mean food for thought?
Exactly. Our brains need all those good nutrients to function at their best. A diet that's packed with fruits, veggies, whole grains, and healthy fats, well, that's like giving your brain the building blocks it needs.
So no more all-nighters fueled by pizza and energy drinks.
Got it. Probably a wise choice. And last but definitely not least, let's talk about stress.
Ah, stress. The curse of modern life.
It's true, stress is always going to be a part of life, but chronic stress can really do a number on our brains. When we're stressed, our bodies release this hormone called cortisol, which in small doses can actually be helpful.
Like when you need a jolt of energy to finish a project.
Exactly. But when your cortisol levels are high for a long time, well, it can actually damage brain cells and mess with our cognitive function.
Okay, so finding healthy ways to manage stress is key for keeping our brains sharp.
Absolutely. Things like exercise, meditation, getting out in nature, and connecting with people you care about, all of these can help lower those cortisol levels and bring a sense of calm and well-being.
This all makes so much sense. It's like a holistic approach to cognitive health, taking care of our bodies, managing stress, making good choices about how we use our brains.
That's what it's all about. The impact of AI on our brains, well, it's not set in stone. It really comes down to the choices we make and the habits we build.
It's good to know we actually have some control over all of this.
We do. And remember, this isn't a one-time thing. It's a journey, right? As AI keeps getting more advanced, we need to stay flexible, be proactive, and finding ways to use its power while also holding on to our own cognitive strengths.
Well said. So to wrap things up, what's like one final nugget of wisdom you'd give to our listeners who want us to stay mentally sharp in the age of AI?
Be curious, be engaged, and be intentional. Embrace the power of AI, but don't let it do your thinking for you. Keep your brain active, take care of your mental well-being, and never stop learning.
Those are some wise words. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of AI and cognition. And until next time, stay curious and keep those brains buzzing.